Welcome once again to these studies in the book we know as the Gospel of Mark. As we now know, of course, it is an account of the life of Jesus, supplied by eyewitnesses. So we can be confident that what it describes actually happened. But the challenge, of course, that the author places before each one of us is, if this is true, what does it mean for me? We will see that this question is very much in Mark's mind in the passage we're considering today. Mark chapter 9, verses 14 to 29. So let me read the verses to you. Mark says, "When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. 'What are you arguing with them about?' he asked. A man in the crowd answered, 'Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not.' 'You unbelieving generation,' Jesus replied, 'how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me.' So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, 'How long has he been like this?' 'From childhood,' he answered. 'It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him, but if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us.' 'If you can,' said Jesus. 'Everything is possible for one who believes.' Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, 'I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief.' When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. 'You deaf and mute spirit,' he said, 'I command you, come out of him and never enter him again.' The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, 'He's dead.' But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, 'Why couldn't we drive it out?' Jesus replied, 'This kind can only come out by prayer.' Now, the miracle stories in the Bible are often presented as acted parables. They don't simply describe what occurred, but invite us to go, as it were, behind the event and reflect upon what it implies about God and his ways. So here, this event is intended to tell us something about Jesus and his kingdom, and the way we should respond to him. And the first point is the most obvious. Mark believes that this miracle confirms that Jesus is the all-powerful God incarnate, before whom even devils fear and fly. So we notice that Mark links this passage to that which precedes. He's not always so precise, but here he begins by telling us that this took place when they came to the other disciples. This is important. Peter had previously acknowledged that Jesus was, in his view, the Son of God, and upon the mountain from which Jesus and the three disciples were descending, that confession had been apparently vindicated. Jesus was revealed as Son of God, enshrouded in the essential glory of deity. Jesus was also shown to be the promised Messiah, for Moses and Elijah, representatives of the law and the prophets, had seen his coming exodus in Jerusalem, or so it's described, and the fulfillment of all their expectations. There, the powers of darkness that control so much in our world will be dealt the promised final death blow. And here that power is demonstrated. With imperious command, the demon possessing the young man, as described here, is driven out and has to stay out. Very simply, Jesus has power over all spiritual powers, opposed to God. The second point, and one we've already alluded to, is this: that this story is intended to remind us that we live in a world in which we are helpless in the face of the dark forces that oppose us, even if we usually pretend that this is not the case. But this is all in vivid contrast to the scene which faced Jesus on his return from the mountain. Note the seriousness of the human predicament, which is here demonstrated by several facts that are emphasized by Mark, never, as we know of him, given to recounting unnecessary detail. So we note the helpless and hopeless condition of the demon-possessed young man. This is clearly described as a severe case of demonic interference, and yet it is symptomatic of a world in the thrall to the devil. The description here is full, vivid, and tragic. We also notice the tragic consequences of this young man's condition on those around him. His father's response to Jesus is poignant. Listen to the words again. The child had suffered, we are told, from childhood, and it's often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. In this short comment by the child's father, we're reminded that the powers of spiritual darkness destroy every relationship that is touched by them. And allied to this was the powerlessness of the disciples to put it right. The human predicament is thus revealed as a hopeless and tragic one, which even the best intentioned seemed powerless to resolve. If we're honest with ourselves, we're not unaware of the dark powers at work in us and our world, and of our powerlessness to do anything about their predatory and destructive actions. In this miracle, Mark sees this truth explicit in this one situation. With this in mind, we notice that Mark makes two emphatic points. Firstly, there is Jesus' comment in the last verse where he says, "This kind can come out only by prayer." And secondly, there is the comment by the child's father to Jesus, "I believe, help me to overcome my unbelief." I would like to explore these two statements in the order that I've just given them to you. The point that Jesus makes in his comment that this kind can only come out by prayer is not immediately obvious. Indeed, there is some confusion as to the meaning and even the content of this verse. However, the older versions are probably incorrect to include "and fasting," and this kind probably places emphasis on kind and is equivalent to all demons. This being the case, Jesus is not referring to a certain type of prayer, but a life of total dependence on him and his power expressed in humble prayer. So the disciples had been authorized and invested with the authority to exorcise demons, and one in which they had been successfully exercising. They'd no reason to believe that that would fail now. However, they'd come to assume that they had a semi-magical power that they could draw upon at will. In fact, however, they were always and ever dependent on the source of their strength, on Jesus. And this links well with child's father's comment. Jesus was looking not for a certain degree, quality or amount of faith, but trust in him, even if beset by understandable doubts and fears. Thus, these two verses emphasize that in humble trust, we can look to Jesus and only to him to destroy the powers of darkness in us and those around us. It would appear that everything in this passage is intended to bring us to this very conclusion. And so we're invited to apply these truths to ourselves. If we're not yet followers of Jesus, we may throw scorn upon Christians and their apparent powerlessness. There may, as we have seen, be a reason for this. And it may be that many Christians have lost their way, rather like the disciples in this story. However, we ourselves may still be longing for freedom from our dark side, which despite our efforts seems to drag us ever deeper into the mire. And here we're given hope. There is also a lesson for those of us who are already Christians. We may be struggling to make progress which seems painfully slow. However, we can find confidence that hand in hand with Jesus we shall win through. Equally, of course, we may be overconfident of our spiritual success, and we need to heed the warning. Without Jesus, we can do nothing. And finally, if we are longing to see Jesus' rule demonstrated, there is assurance here that he reigns. And even in the darkness, we should humbly trust in him.